Good evening. It's Thursday, August 20th. More than 24 major wildfires taxed the state's firefighting capacity today. The fires have destroyed 175 structures, including homes, are threatening 50,000 more. 33 civilians and firefighters have been injured. Ash and smoke fill much of the air in the San Francisco Bay Area, with air quality ranging from unhealthy to downright dangerous. Former White House advisor Steve Bannon arrested on a yacht off the East Coast on charges that he and 3 others defrauded donors to an online fundraising scheme called We Build the Wall. Bannon promised that 100% of the donated money would be used for the Wall Project, a pet of President Trump, but the defendants collectively used hundreds of thousands of dollars for themselves. California's Eviction and Foreclosure Prevention Bill, approved by the Senate Appropriations Committee, that passing that key vote moves the legislation to the Senate floor for its final vote next week. President Trump has his administration designate public school teachers as critical infrastructure workers, an act that could mean sending them back into the classroom even when exposed to COVID-19. And Lyft and Uber are rescued at the bell by an appeals court. They were threatening to shut down their California operations at midnight tonight. From Pacifica Radio, KPFA in Berkeley, KPFK in Los Angeles, this is an early edition of the Evening News. I'm Mark Miracle. More than 24 major fires were scorching California today and taxing the state's firefighting capacity, sparked by an unprecedented lightning siege that dropped nearly 11,000 strikes over several days. The fires have destroyed 175 structures, including homes, and are threatening 50,000 more. 33 civilians and firefighters have been injured. Most of the activity is in Northern California, where fires have chewed through nearly 500 square miles of brushland, rural areas, canyon country, and dense forest. More than 10,000 California firefighters are on the front lines, but fire officials in charge of each of the major fire complexes say they are strapped for resources. Some firefighters were working 72-hour shifts instead of the usual 24 hours. The state has requested 375 engines and crew from other states. There is heavy competition, however, in the western United States for equipment and people. The unusual large size and number of fires at once, other fires throughout the West, and the loss of inmate firefighting crews because inmates have been released from prisons to prevent the spread of the coronavirus have helped create the shortage of resources. California Governor Gavin Newsom said the state had prepared for a tough fire season by hiring more than 800 additional firefighters and acquiring more aircraft to fight blazes, but resources were strapped given the number of wildfires.
Currently, we are battling some 367 known fires that are burning statewide. And I say known fires because when you see this amount of lightning strikes, as those lightning strikes spark, as you have a lot of smoke, you have a difficult time determining total number of fires.
Officials say statewide firefighting resources are stretched thin. Calfire spokesman Will Powers said the number of fires and the terrain are complicating firefighting efforts.
When you have a West Coast heat wave, we have fire activity all across the western United States, putting pressure on those assets within the states, and that includes up in the north or the Pacific North coast and areas of Oregon and Washington State as well. So complicating this picture, challenging time, but one where, again, we're very familiar, one we're more than capable of stepping up and doing everything we can to meet the moment.
The state's recent history of often deadly wildfires is due in part to global warming, which has brought hotter, drier weather, causing more of California to burn more often, and burn more intensely. State Senator Bill Dodd represents District 3, which includes the epicenter of what's called the LNU Lightning Fire Complex. 5 counties, Sonoma, Lake, Napa, Solano, and Yolo. Dodd suggested to KPFA morning show host Brian Edwards-Tiekert that he may be holding hearings on CAL FIRE's management and resource deployment strategy.
The men and the women that are working at CAL FIRE and really monitoring these fires, they've got an extraordinary responsibility, and that's to really monitor the whole state of California and decide where the assets go. A lot of the air assets were down in Southern California already. I think the Apple Fire and the Lake Fire, which were threatening large swaths of, suburban, areas, lots of population. And, I was spending, most of the last 2 days trying to get some assets into this particular area, but they just weren't there. This is one of the things that we saw in 2017. When you have a wildfire like this, your local fire departments are pretty much on their own for the first, it was, I think, 72 hours before we got any appreciable help, in Napa or Sonoma counties. And in this particular case, we're seeing the same thing. A lot of these firefighters on the line, are there 12, 16 hours, and there is no B team. There is no B team. So I think that's something that, that it's really becoming clear to me that we have to fix this mutual aid and try to find a way to organize and get it moving more quickly. The challenge in that, of course, is where they would normally come from: Oregon, Washington, Nevada, Idaho, the 10 or 12 western states. They're all having fire events of their own. And so I have some friends on a strike team in Oregon. They just said, hey, we can't come down this year. We kind of befriended them when they were here the last time. We've got our own fires here, and we're on the line, and we're, worried about this.
Yeah, let's talk legislative nuts and bolts. A few minutes ago,
Sure.
About half an hour ago, we were speaking to the president of the union that represents CAL FIRE firefighters. His assessment is CAL FIRE is still understaffed. And particularly understaffed if you take into account the fact that the state is heavily reliant on prison firefighting crews that are very diminished because of the impact of this pandemic, and maybe long-term diminished because the state's trying to not have overcrowded prisons.
Well, I certainly understand that argument. I'm not sure that beefing. I mean, first of all, we need full staffing. We've got to get there. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. But based on what I've seen, the air assets would be substantially more effective. Early on. There was a lot of homes that later burned, like what happened in Vacaville the last couple of nights. Had we had not had so many fires in the state of California, or we had more air resources, that may never have happened because they were going to be able to take care of that early. It's really easy to be the Monday morning quarterback, when it's happening to you, but I think this is the subject of a hearing, a legislative hearing that, my committee, the Governmental Organizations Committee, oversees Cal OES, Office of Emergency Services, and I'm already trying to develop a hearing where we can get, the aftermath and really understand what happened. Of course, that's going to be, probably 30, 60 days down the line. I don't know how long it's going to take to get through this. I mean, with zero containment on any of these fires, it's pretty gruesome.
And that's State Senator Bill Dodd, who represents Solano, Yolo, Sonoma, Napa, and Sonoma County, talking about the trials of his constituents. The air quality in the San Francisco Bay Area ranges from unhealthy for sensitive populations, downright dangerous for everyone in some areas, but virtually no one in the San Francisco Bay Area has escaped exposure to the smoky air. Health officials recommend that people stay indoors as much as possible, avoid outdoor exercise, close their windows, and set their air conditioners to recirculate air rather than drawing it in from the outside. Dr. John Balmes is a professor of medicine at the University of California, San Francisco, and a professor of environmental health sciences at the UC Berkeley School of Public Health. In an interview with KPFA's Upfront host Kat Brooks, he described the particular concerns about the double whammy of wildfire smoke during the COVID pandemic.
The main pollutant in wildfire smoke that we're concerned about in terms of health effects are the fine particles, PM 2.5, meaning that they're particles that are smaller than 2.5 microns. And just to give a sense of the size of that, human hair is about 60 microns in diameter, so these are really tiny, and they make it down into the deep lung, where they can cause airway inflammation, and they can also impair the ability to fight infection. So in the context of the COVID pandemic, we're very concerned about increased risk for progression from asymptomatic SARS-CoV-2 infection to more severe COVID disease. And we have information about air pollution from China, from Italy, and several studies now from the U.S., which suggest that higher air pollution from other sources than wildfire, higher particulate pollution in particular, can increase the risk of progression of COVID-19 to more severe disease.
I have a question about repeated exposure and long-term health effects. So wildfire season happens every year. It seemingly is getting worse every single year. This is sort of the new normal, right, for California. What is the impact of repeated exposure to these particles on the lungs, like the long-term health effects that people can expect?
Well, Kat, that's a very important question that we don't really have the answer to in terms of data, because we haven't had a chance to really study that well. Based on what we know about other types of air pollution, though, we think that recurrent exposures, lead to more chronic effects than single heavy exposures over a few days.
Dr. Balmes, you mentioned the N95 masks. For the vast majority of us, those aren't the kind of masks that we're wearing on a day-to-day basis to protect ourselves from COVID. Do these cloth masks that folks are walking around in provide any protection at all, or nah?
Well, it really depends. There's an incredible variability in the filtration efficiency of cloth masks, but in general, they don't protect very well from wildfire smoke. They're mostly to prevent us from infecting other people with aerosol. They're not very good at protecting us from exposures. The N95s are much better. They have a 95% efficiency at protecting us from breathing in particles that are smaller than, as small as 0.3 microns, which are the really tiny particles. Surgical masks, which many of us are wearing, are better than cloth masks, but nowhere near as good as N95s. Now, N95s are, without an exhalation valve, are supposed to be reserved for healthcare workers right now. If you can get a hold of N95s with exhalation valves, which healthcare workers can't use, those are very good for protecting from wildfire smoke.
Dr. John Baums is a professor of medicine at UCSF and at the UC Berkeley School of Public Health. UCLA climate scientist Daniel Swain warns the smoke won't be going away anytime soon. In a tweet, Swain says the scope and density of the smoke plumes are visible in satellite images. He also says as many of the fires will burn for days, even weeks, air quality will be extremely poor for an extended period of time. Wildfires are blazing throughout the Bay Area, threatening thousands of homes as fire crews struggle to surround them in deep terrain and blistering heat. The lightning-caused fires chewed through 400 square miles of brushland, rural areas, canyon country, and dense forest in the North Bay, the East Bay, the South Bay, and Santa Cruz. Christina Honested reports.
A series of lightning strikes in recent days have caused more than 300 fires in California. Dozens of them are in the Greater Bay Area, and tens of thousands of people have been evacuated. Governor Gavin Newsom gives a big picture in a video posted on social media.
376 active fires throughout the state, unprecedented number of lightning strikes that occurred over a 72-hour period, 11,000 dry lightning strikes, particularly in Northern California. So here we are layering health protocols because of COVID with emergency protocols related to evacuees from wildfires.
There are fires in the North Bay, the East Bay, and the South Bay. Fires have also stretched into the San Joaquin Valley and Santa Cruz County. In all, they've burned more than 308,000 acres. That's more than 500 square miles, and there's no end in sight. Hundreds of structures have burned, including buildings and homes. There's at least 2 reported deaths. A pilot on a water dropping mission in western Fresno County died Wednesday morning when his helicopter crashed, and a PG&E utility worker died at a fire in the Vacaville area under unclear circumstances. He was found in his vehicle. Shauna Williams is a CAL FIRE unit chief for the fires in Lake Sonoma and Solano counties. She's urging people to evacuate when ordered, but says she understands people's frustration.
Over the last 5 years or more, many of you have been evacuated, and many of you, your families, someone you know, has lost their home. It is a very stressful time. All of us, your first responders, understand that, and we're here for you. Please be prepared. Please, when asked to do so, please evacuate. It's important that you do your part so that we can help you. It's going to take time. This is a very large fire. It's one of many in the state of California. And honestly, our resources are stretched very far.
CAL FIRE, the state's firefighting agency, has broken down the fires into 3 large complexes. The CZU for San Mateo and Santa Cruz counties, the LNU, that's Lake and Napa, as well as 3 other counties, including Solano, and the SCU. That's the largest complex, made up of 20 wildfires that have burned through 137,000 acres in Santa Clara, Alameda, Contra Costa, San Joaquin, and Stanislaus counties. CAL FIRE reports some of the brush and terrain has little to no fire history. Thus, it's providing decadent fuels conducive to extreme fire growth. Since fires began 2 days ago, they've scorched through 220 square miles. And as Steven Vollmer, a CAL FIRE fire captain, explains, there are other challenges to getting that fire under control. It's currently 5% contained.
Normally, during the nighttime, the relative humidity goes up and the fire spread slows down. But on this incident, there's a little phenomenon that's happening, and the relative humidity is actually dropping drastically at night, where there's very poor humidity recovery, and that's allowing the fire to burn actively all day and all night long out there, and it's really hampering the control efforts of the resources on the ground. Some of the things that we also look at is the rate of spread, and we're looking at just in the grass, the fire will move at up to 120 feet a minute, and that is also hampering the control efforts because it's putting the fire moving faster than we can actually engage it safely.
Calfire reports 2 firefighter and civilian injuries. More than 1,000 personnel have been deployed to assist in firefighting efforts on the SCU fire, and there's several mandatory evacuation orders, including north and south of Santa Clara County's line, east of San Jose city limits to the Santa Clara County line, and east to unincorporated parts of the county, as well as south and east of Mount Hamilton Road, east and north of Highway 152, and Highway 130 at Quimby and Three Springs Road is closed. Evacuation orders are also in effect in Alameda County for all of Mines Road. The city of Fremont at Mill Creek Road is under an evacuation warning. Del Puerto Canyon Road, State Route 130 between Mines Road and Diablo Grand Parkway is also closed. In Stanislaus County, west of I-580 to the Alameda County line is under evacuation, and east of Alameda County's line to I-580 and Stanislaus County is also under evacuation. The second largest fire is the NLU that spans 5 counties, Napa, Lake, Sonoma, Solano, and Yolo counties. The fires consumed more than 131,000 acres, or 205 square miles. Nearly 600 personnel are battling the blazes there. 2 large fires in Lake and Sonoma counties have merged and are now one mega fire. At least 105 structures have been destroyed and 70 others damaged. Several portions of Highway 128 are closed in Napa County. In Sonoma County, portions of Highway 1 are closed off around Fort Ross. Bohemian Highway at the Russian River and parts of Highway 116 are also closed. There are dozens of evacuation warnings. In Napa County, St. Helena Hospital was evacuated. Communities near Highway 128 were also evacuated. Fires have nearly surrounded Lake Berryessa, where communities there are under evacuation. In Solano County, areas around Fairfield were also evacuated. In Sonoma County, parts of Cazadero, like Austin Creek Road, are under evacuation. Fort Ross and south and east of the Russian River to Windsor have also been evacuated. The Bohemian Highway and areas south of Highway 101, east of the Sonoma coast to Wallala, are under evacuation. Orders in Lake County, Hidden Valley Lake and Jerusalem Valley are under evacuation orders. Fires are heading towards Guerneville and Rio Neto. Mark Essick is Sonoma County Sheriff. He says once people are ordered to evacuate, they should not return.
Evacuation areas are dangerous. Once an area is evacuated, we do not want you to re-enter that area. We have had some minor reports of people re-entering evacuation areas, and they've had to be rescued. When we have to rescue you from an evacuation area, it creates a secondary burden on police and fire services and adds to the problem. So please stay out of those evacuated areas.
The third fire impacting the Bay Area is the CZU fire in San Mateo and Santa Cruz counties. It scorched more than 40,000 acres. More than 22,000 people have been evacuated from those fires, which have destroyed 20 structures and injured 3 people. Dan Olson is Chief Information Officer for the CZU fire.
Currently, the fire is at 40,000 acres with 0% containment. We have roughly 600 personnel assigned to the incident. Overnight, we saw the fire make significant runs in the Davenport, Ben Lomond, and Empire Ridge area. Multiple evacuation orders and warnings were issued throughout the course of the night, and we anticipate more in the next 24 to 48 hours. We ask that the citizens abide by those warnings and heed them, and please safely remove yourself from the area.
Evacuation orders are in effect for the town of Felton. And in San Mateo County, the town of Loma Mar is under evacuation orders as well. California Governor Gavin Newsom says the state had prepared for a tough fire season by hiring more than 800 additional firefighters and acquiring more aircraft to fight the fires, but their resources are strapped thin, given the number of blazes. The governors of Arizona, Texas, and Nevada are sending crews and support. I'm Christina Onnested reporting for KPFA.
The LNU lightning complex fires in the North Bay have ravaged 130,000 acres, killed a utility worker, damaged or destroyed 285 structures, and forced people to evacuate in the oppressive heat during a pandemic. KPFA's Karen Argood talked with two women whose families, already disrupted by the coronavirus, have had to evacuate and start back to school. She filed this report.
Tiffany DeCreville is stuck in a small hotel room in Napa, trying to keep her two children, 8 and 10, from going stir-crazy.
And you clean up the Play-Doh. I don't want it on the floor. Please.
Even though she'd been evacuated from her home in Circle Oaks, just north of Napa, during the 2017 Tubbs fire, Tiffany says this time she froze up.
Just freaked out and had to get my animals out. Kind of crazy. I was lucky enough that I didn't have my kids with me. They happened to be at my mother-in-law's. So when I found out, I went into like a complete panic and called my husband, and, you know, he's at work. And so he tells me, he's like, well, I got to make phone calls. And I have the ambulance or the fire department like driving through the neighborhood with the sirens going, telling us to evacuate. So, what? So I get off the phone and went into complete panic mode. I probably didn't pack anything that I was supposed to. I think I got like a couple pairs of shorts for each one of us. Well, it's hot. It's hot. We need shorts.
Tiffany had to shop for everything, even a toothbrush, and she says she's at the end of her rope.
It's just crazy. All this COVID, I spent 5 months isolating my son from COVID because he's got a rare disorder, and now I'm forced out here in the public where I don't want to be.
Now Tiffany's scrambling to find Chromebooks so her kids can start school.
You know, I just can't even wrap my head around that, let alone like trying to get school supplies so my kids could start school, and then having them sit anywhere for 3 hours out of the day in front of a computer. And that's just the first 3 hours. We're also then supposed to do science and social studies and art ourselves with the kids for the rest of the afternoon. I wish, like, right now that the district wouldn't be putting so much pressure on us. Like, we really just need to be able to relax and get through this and not have to try to educate our kids for 8 hours a day.
The DeCrevilles are still waiting to hear when they can return home. Napa resident Erin Super, her husband, 2 teens, and all their pets have been staying with her mom since their evacuation 2 days ago. Erin is a Willow Elementary first grade teacher. She describes the new challenges of virtual teaching, especially with her little ones.
The challenge of trying to be able to make good relationships with those kids and then be aware of the trauma that they've gone through with all of this. With younger children, you miss that physical connection too, whether it's a pat on the back or a hug for someone who, you know, has those tears. You want to be able to do that, and you're not able to do that. And just knowing that, you know, for kids as well, it's hard being away from people and being in that isolation, and you need that physical aspect of teaching where you get to look at someone in the eye and shake their hand when they come in or give them a high five as they come through the door, and we're not able to do that. So how's that going to change education?
She's been a teacher for 23 years and says she doesn't think she would have gone into this profession had she known it would come to this. She worries how virtual education will affect her students' communication skills.
You need to be able to talk to people. You need to be able to look people in the eye and have a conversation with them. So making sure that we're still helping to make that happen.
But Erin is staying positive, and she says she's prepared to do what it takes to help her students get through these difficult times.
I'm not afraid to go into something deeper that needs to be talked about, which that very well could be. I mean, there could be quite a few kids tomorrow and the next day and the next couple weeks that, you know, don't want to get. I've heard from a couple parents their kid didn't like to get onto Zoom. They had a really hard time being on Zoom. 2.5 hours is a really long time, and it is. So that flexibility piece on my part, and then also with families, is going to be huge, because there are going to be issues. There are going to be times where I try to play some video or something or show them something and it won't work. And that's okay. You know, everybody knows that we're all kind of in the same boat here. So hang in there. We'll make it work.
For Pacifica Radio, KPFA, I'm Karen Argood.
You are listening to an early edition of the Evening News on KPFA in Berkeley, KPFK in Los Angeles, KFCF Fresno, online at kpfa.org. This newscast will go until 5 o'clock Pacific Daylight Time. President Donald Trump's former chief strategist, Steve Bannon, was pulled from a luxury yacht and arrested today on allegations that he and 3 associates ripped off donors trying to fund a southern border wall, making him the latest in a long list of Trump allies to be charged with the crime. Organizers of the We Build the Wall group portrayed themselves as eager to help the president build a big, beautiful barrier along the U.S.-Mexico border. As Trump had promised during the 2016 campaign, they raised more than $25 million from thousands of donors and pledged that 100% of that money would be used for the project. But according to the criminal charges unsealed today, much of the money never made it to the wall. Instead, it was used to line the pockets of group members, including Bannon, who served in Trump's White House and worked for his campaign. He allegedly took over $1 million, using some of the money to secretly pay co-defendant Brian Colfage, the founder of the project, and to cover hundreds of thousands of dollars in personal expenses. The arrests make Bannon the latest addition to a startling long list of Trump associates who have been prosecuted, including his former campaign chair, Paul Manafort, whom Bannon replaced, his longtime lawyer and fixer, Michael Cohen, and his former national security advisor, Michael Flynn. Trump has also made clear that he's willing to use his near-limitless pardon power to help political allies escape legal jeopardy, most recently commuting the sentence of longtime political advisor Roger Stone. Bannon was taken into custody by the Postal Inspection Service on a 150-foot luxury yacht called Lady May, which was off the coast of Connecticut. The boat is owned by an exiled Chinese billionaire and is currently for sale for nearly $28 million. When asked about the arrest of his former aide at the White House, Trump quickly distanced himself from Bannon.
I feel very badly. I haven't been dealing with him for a long period of time, as most of the people in this room know. He was involved in our campaign. He worked for Goldman Sachs. He worked for a lot of companies, but he was involved likewise in our campaign and for a small part of the administration very early on. I haven't been dealing with him at all. I know nothing about the project other than I didn't like, when I read about it, I didn't like it. I said, this is for government, this isn't for private people. And it sounded to me like showboating, and I think I let my opinion be very strongly stated at the time. I didn't like it. It was showboating and maybe looking for funds, but you'll have to see what happens. I think it's a very sad thing for Mr. Bannon.
But an immigration plan unveiled by Trump last year did include a proposal to allow the public to donate toward his long-promised wall, as the Bannon Group had originally said was its mission, before changing it to private construction of their own wall. Trump denounced that project publicly, tweeting last month that he disagreed with doing a very tiny section of wall by a private group which raised money by ads. He claimed it was only done to make him look bad. Also charged were Andrew Badolato and Timothy Shea, the owner of an energy drink company called Winning Energy. The company's cans feature a cartoon superhero image of Trump and claim to contain 12 ounces of liberal tears. Other prominent members of the wall group include former Kansas Secretary of State Chris Kobach, its general counsel Eric Prince, founder of the controversial security firm Blackwater, former Republican Congressman Tom Tancredo of Colorado, and former Major League Baseball pitcher Curt Schilling. They were not named in the indictment. The charges include conspiracy to commit wire fraud and conspiracy to commit money laundering. Bannon pled not guilty in court today and was released on a $5 million bond. A New York federal judge today cleared the way for a New York prosecutor to get President Trump's tax returns. Federal Judge Victor Marrero's ruling rejected a last-ditch attempt by his lawyers to block a subpoena issued to his accounting firm. The judge's ruling echoed his prior decision in the case, which was upheld by the U.S. Supreme Court last month. The High Court returned the case to Marrero so Trump's lawyers could get another chance to challenge the subpoena issued by Manhattan District Attorney Cyrus Vance Jr. Trump's lawyers immediately appealed today's decision to the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. Former Vice President Joe Biden makes the most important speech of his lifetime tonight when he accepts the Democratic Party presidential nomination. President Trump held an event today just outside the former vice president's birthplace in Scranton, Pennsylvania. His campaign said Trump's speech was to cover what Trump will call a half century of Joe Biden failing America. Last night, California Senator Kamala Harris made history as the first woman of color nominated to serve on the presidential ticket of one of the two major U.S. political parties. Harris, who's the daughter of Jamaican and Indian immigrants, addressed race, racism, and equality during her speech. She spoke of her Indian immigrant mother and made a call for racial justice, saying, "None of us are free until all of us are."
And let's be clear, there is no vaccine for racism. We've got to do the work. For George Floyd, for Breonna Taylor, for the lives of too many others to name, for our children, and for all of us. We've got to do the work to fulfill that promise of equal justice under law. Because here's the thing, none of us are free until all of us are free.
In his speech last night, former President Obama warned that the survival of U.S. democracy is in jeopardy if President Trump is reelected in November. He warned that his successor has sought only to help himself and his friends and is doing everything he can to discourage and to hamper people from voting.
They know they can't win you over with their policies. So they're hoping to make it as hard as possible for you to vote and to convince you that your vote does not matter. That is how they win. That is how they get to keep making decisions that affect your life and the lives of the people you love. That's how the economy will keep getting skewed to the wealthy and well-connected. How our health systems will let more people fall through the cracks. That's how a democracy withers, until it's no democracy at all. And we cannot let that happen.
Tonight, Joe Biden will be accepting the presidential nominations. Others speaking tonight include his former Democratic rivals, Senator Cory Booker and Pete Buttigieg. Pacifica's coverage of the convention will resume immediately following this newscast. The United States Postal Service faces multiple lawsuits over recent mail disruptions caused by cuts made by the new Postmaster General, Louis DeJoy. Eleanor Holmes Norton, the Washington, D.C.'s delegate to the House of Representatives, says some D.C. residents are already struggling to receive their mail, and she's demanding congressional action. KBFA's Kate Ida has the story.
The new Postmaster General of the U.S. Postal Service, Louis DeJoy, was a fundraiser and major donor for President Trump before he took control of the Postal Service in June. Since then, he's rapidly engineered cuts and operations changes that are disrupting mail delivery operations, causing problems for Americans that rely on the post office for paychecks, medications, food, and other necessary items. Across the country, mail sorting machines have been dismantled, blue mail collection boxes taken away, and post office employees have had their working hours limited. Keith Hooks, the vice president of the National Association of Letter Carriers, says customers in Washington, D.C. have been complaining about the dramatic disruption in mail service.
The customers stated that they have continuous problems with mail delivery from the hour that it arrived to not arriving at all. Some customers waiting for expected life-saving medications to come in, and they don't. As they risk their health each day, along with other frontline essential workers and letter carriers have become angry, frustrated, humiliated, and embarrassed by various USPS management initiatives that are now resulting in delayed mail and undelivered routes in many areas of the country.
The widespread disruptions have stunned Americans and led to warnings that Trump is trying to undermine the Postal Service for the November election. Civil and voting rights organizations are suing to halt the changes and restore Postal Service operations. More than 20 states announced they are also suing to stop the changes. Following public outcry about the changes, Postmaster General DeJoy said that he would stop the planned removal of mail processing machines and the blue mail collection boxes, as well as the initiative to change retail hours at post offices. But Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi says DeJoy told her that he has no intention of restoring blue mailboxes or sorting equipment that have already been removed, which are already causing problems for communities. Ray Robinson, the executive vice president of the American Postal Workers Union, says mail processing machines have been removed in several places in and around Washington, D.C.
Gaithersburg is actually our sister station. However, that's true that they did take some out. They also took some out in Washington, D.C., as well as Southern Maryland. The effect it will have is that the mail sorting machines run 35,000 pieces of mail per hour. So a lot of mail that they can get out. Clearly that helps the mail-in voting. Trying to do it by hand is almost impossible. So that's the question that we have now that you've taken it out and you've stopped. Are you going to bring them back? Because we clearly need them for the upcoming election. The explanation that came from the Postmaster General is that they're cutting costs.
The House of Representatives is set to vote on legislation that would reverse the service changes and provide $25 billion to help Postal Service operations. Washington, D.C. delegate to the House of Representatives, Eleanor Holmes Norton, says it's essential to pass this legislation.
We can still prevent an indelible scar on the free elections that are about to be held that would invariably result from changes in the Postal Service at this point. Of course, we must pass our bill. The Delivering for America Act, I am a member of the committee that will be meeting with concerning that act on Monday. And we must get, of course, the $25 billion necessary to save the Postal Service.
Trump has made it clear that he wants to block the $25 billion in emergency aid, saying that he wants to restrict mail-in voting for the election. Trump has also said that he wants to block a Democratic proposal that would provide $3.6 billion in additional election money to states to help process their expected surge in mail-in ballots due to the coronavirus pandemic. The funds are part of the HEROES Act, a larger coronavirus aid package that passed in the House but has been halted in the Senate. Reporting for KPFA Pacifica Radio, I'm Kate Ida.
At least 4,800 chicks shipped to Maine farmers through the U.S. Postal Service have arrived dead in recent weeks after the Postmaster General made his changes. Maine Democrat Shelley Pingree raised the issue of the dead chicks and the losses the farms are facing in a letter to Postmaster General DeJoy and the Agriculture Department head Sonny Perdue. Thousands more chicks that moved through the Postal Service's processing center in Massachusetts were also reported to have died. DeJoy is scheduled to testify before a Senate committee tomorrow and a House committee on Monday. Bad news on the jobs front. The number of laid-off workers seeking U.S. unemployment benefits rose to 1.8 million last week after 2 weeks of declines. The new numbers are evidence that employers are still cutting large numbers of jobs as a result of the coronavirus pandemic. A rising number of people who have lost jobs say they don't believe they'll ever get their jobs back. The government said the total number of people receiving unemployment aid declined last week from 15.5 million to 14.8 million. Those recipients are now receiving far less aid because the $600 a week federal benefit is expired, which means unemployed people must now get by solely on much smaller checks from their states alone. California's eviction and foreclosure prevention bill was approved by the state Senate Appropriations Committee yesterday. Earlier in the week, it had been subjected to a marathon hearing on its merits by the Senate Judiciary Committee before winning the approval of that body. KPFA's Noah Litwer has a story.
Lawmakers heard testimony from Californians for and against AB 1436, which would protect renters from eviction due to the pandemic and landlords from mortgage foreclosures. The bill addresses a looming deadline of September 1st, which is when a court-ordered California eviction moratorium is set to expire. According to a model developed by a coalition of economists and legal experts, if no action is taken, within a month, as many as 4 million Californians could be forced out of their homes. San Francisco Assembly member David Hsu authored the legislation.
When the temporary eviction ban expires, all renters in our state will immediately owe any and all unpaid rent at once. And if we don't change state law in the next 2 weeks, we will see a massive wave of evictions. This will be catastrophic for tenants, property owners, homelessness, and COVID-19 spread. Through no fault of their own, many tenants have been unable to pay the rent. Renters have had to stay home to comply with shelter-in-place orders, and countless Californians have lost jobs and income as the economy has been shut down.
The legislation has provoked an unprecedented amount of public interest. Over 600 Californian residents testified about their opinion during a marathon 6-hour Judiciary Committee hearing. Some, like Adam Riley with the California Chamber of Commerce, opposed the bill, citing what he said was an imbalance of benefits to renters and landlords, and the burden it will place onto banks and lender institutions, not to mention borrowers in the future.
The unconstitutional provisions, inadequate safeguards, and unreasonable timeframes shift the economic fallout from COVID-19 on rental property owners, but fails to help them carry this burden by providing any financial assistance. The bill fails to strike a balance of protecting renters and rental property owners from the impacts of state-imposed economic shutdowns. The banking language will cause more problems than solutions. Most important for the Judiciary Committee, the case law from the Ninth Circuit to the U.S. Supreme Court is crystal clear. Banks are governed by uniform federal standards that preempt state regulatory authority. As the Assembly Banking Committee opined earlier this year on this exact language, quote, due to federal preemption, state laws cannot address many of the challenges faced by our constituents who cannot repay their loans. Without major changes, this bill will exacerbate California's housing crisis with a risk of increased foreclosures, a divestment in California housing and construction, and further job losses across California.
The chair of the Judicial Committee, Senator Hannah Beth Jackson, reminded opponents of the bill that most landlords and homeowners would receive 12 months of mortgage foreclosure protection, and that some of the opposition to the bill was coming from banks and lenders who would receive limited benefit from the legislation and may even profit from the crisis.
The next link up in the financial chain, which is banks and lenders, now raise their voice to say, don't make us bear the burden of having to wait to get paid. But here's the truth that we all, I think, have to confront. None of us wanted this situation. None of us are happy with this situation. But all of us are going to have to bear some part of the burden. Otherwise, what's going to happen? We're going to see thousands and thousands of people out in the street. We are going to see homeowners and small landlords foreclosed upon. And what will likely happen then is those who have had the financial means to weather this storm could very well buy up all those properties, enhance their own financial wealth to the detriment of the average person and the average small landlord who finds themselves out on the street. And that, I do not believe, is acceptable to the people in this building. Those are not our values.
The committee voted unanimously to advance AB 1436 for further Senate action. This is Noah Litwer reporting from Oakland, California.
With the Appropriations Committee approval, AB 1436 now moves to the Senate floor for a vote next week. It will need a 2/3 approval there in order to take effect immediately as an emergency measure. New guidance from the Trump administration declares teachers to be critical infrastructure workers. The move could give the green light to exempting teachers from quarantine requirements after they've been exposed to COVID-19, and instead send them right back into the classroom. That would raise the risk that they will spread the respiratory illness to students and coworkers. South Carolina health officials also describe teachers as critical infrastructure workers, although it's unclear if any district there is asking teachers to return before the 14 days of quarantine would be over. National Education Association President Lily Eskelsen Garcia said in a statement that the designation has no legal merit and is more of a rhetorical gambit to give President Trump and those governors who are disregarding the advice and guidance from public health experts an excuse to force educators into unsafe schools. American Federation of Teachers President Randy Weingarten said the Trump administration will always try to change the rules to threaten, bully, and coerce. A county in suburban Atlanta, Georgia, has already designated teachers as critical infrastructure workers, and a spokesperson for Georgia Republican Governor Brian Kemp says his administration is evaluating whether it wants to incorporate the federal guidance into Georgia's legal framework, which could spur more school districts to act. Meanwhile, a leaked White House report says Georgia led the nation last week in new cases of coronavirus per capita. The August 16th report from the White House Coronavirus Task Force recommends several steps to curb the spread of the virus that Kemp has declined to take, including closing bars and issuing face mask mandates in counties with 50 or more active cases. During a contentious press conference, Kemp insisted that other data points paint a different picture.
So I wouldn't be able to speak to who leaked the report, why they leaked it, what the politics were behind the leak. All I'm asking for is Georgians to get all the information. If we're the highest percent capita in the state right now, that's because Texas and Florida and Arizona and some of the other states that were peaking a week or two ago are on the downcline, just like we are. But that is not the only number that Georgians need to look at.
The report from the White House Coronavirus Task Force says that last week Georgia had 216 new cases per 100,000 residents, nearly double the national average. Protesters gathered outside San Francisco City Hall today as a Board of Supervisors budget hearing took place inside. The activists, including representatives from the Chinatown Community Development Center, the Coalition on Homelessness, and unhoused families and their supporters, are demanding funding to protect unhoused families during the COVID-19 pandemic. KPFA's Emma Herdman reports.
Juan Garcia of the Chinatown Community Development Center says that unhoused families and their supporters came together to ring a bell outside of City Hall in order to draw attention to the increasing numbers of unhoused families who have nowhere to safely shelter in place, despite the ongoing threat of the COVID-19 pandemic and the wildfires raging in Sonoma County, making the air unsafe for some folks to breathe.
Our hope is that the Board of Supervisors realize that COVID it's affecting everyone in different many ways, but it's affecting unhoused and formerly unhoused families harder. Most of our unhoused families or formerly unhoused families that were employed before COVID work in service jobs, and most of the service jobs are currently gone.
But although the COVID-19 pandemic continues to create higher unemployment and put people in financially unstable positions, over 100 formerly homeless families on short-term subsidies are expected to take over their full rental payments once those subsidies end. Simultaneously, First Friendship, the only drop-in emergency shelter in San Francisco, has closed its doors. The city did not create an alternative place for families, meaning that there are now 0 options for families experiencing homelessness to access emergency shelter. Garcia says that the city needs to prioritize housing families in vacant apartments across the city.
Right now, the property owners, property managers that are seeing a lot of their renters and tenants leaving either their buildings or the city completely, they want that stable income to come in, and this creates an opportunity for them to cover their costs, have no vacant units, and it offers an opportunity for unhoused families and SRO families to be able to move into these places. There's thousands of open rentals in the city right now. I mean, there was thousands before COVID. Now there's even more.
Activists like Garcia are pushing for the city of San Francisco to create housing stability for families by forming a cohesive source of funding. Currently, nonprofits are taking on the brunt of funding for houseless families. The organization Give2SF has received $20 million in requests for rental assistance alone. There is currently a moratorium on evictions in place that prevents tenants from losing their homes during the pandemic, but it will only be in place until the end of September. After that point, unless the state legislature approves emergency legislation now pending in the Senate, people are expected to pay all back rent in a matter of months or else be forced out of their homes.
I hope that the city does come up with a plan to help families who are struggling and will be struggling once the moratorium ends. Otherwise, we're just going to see a tsunami of homelessness, a tsunami of evictions.
According to City Hall, public comment for the budget meeting will occur on Monday, August 24th at 10 a.m. Comments may also be submitted through the Board of Supervisors budget website, www.sfbos.org/budget information, and by clicking Provide Budget Comment. I'm Emma Herdman for KPFA.
An appeals court is allowing ride-hailing giants Uber and Lyft to continue treating their drivers as independent contractors while an appeal works its way through the court. Both companies had threatened to shut down at midnight tonight if a ruling went into effect tomorrow that would have forced them to treat all their drivers as employees, as required by AB 5, California's landmark gig employment law. The companies are seeking to repeal that law with Proposition 22 on the November ballot, and they're spending at least $110 million to do it. Chris Lee reports.
After a San Francisco Superior Court judge ordered Uber and Lyft to comply with AB 5 earlier this month, the companies threatened to suspend their services in California ahead of the critical November vote, putting hundreds of thousands of drivers out of work. Critics of the move call this extortion. Idan Alva is a Bay Area Lyft driver.
Let's be clear. Proposition 22 was written for app companies by app companies. They're not spending $110 million to make things better for workers. They're spending $110 million for their own benefit and bottom line.
If Prop 22 passes, Uber and Lyft would continue to classify their workers as independent contractors and entitle them to some of the benefits of employment. But Veena Dubal, associate professor of law at the University of California, Hastings, says the measure would create a substandard classification of employment.
The potential impact on not just drivers and delivery workers in the so-called gig economy, the impact is not only incredibly great and devastating, I think that there is also a lot of room then for this model to spread throughout the logistics industry. So I can imagine Amazon, for example, coming in and modeling themselves after these companies in order to fit the regulatory definitions.
Meanwhile, the New York Times reports that Uber and Lyft are looking for schemes to avoid the California law altogether. The Times says one option that both companies are seriously discussing is licensing their brands to operators of vehicle fleets. The ploy would resemble an independently operated franchise, allowing Uber and Lyft to keep an arm's length association with drivers so that the companies would not need to employ them and pay their benefits. I'm Chris Lee, reporting for KPFA.
Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny is in a coma in a hospital in Siberia after falling ill from a suspected poisoning that his allies believe is linked to his political activity. A spokeswoman said the 44-year-old critic of Russian President Putin felt sick on a flight back to Moscow from Siberia and was taken to a Siberian hospital after the plane made an emergency landing. Partly cloudy and windy windy around the San Francisco Bay tomorrow with highs in the mid-70s. It should be sunny all day tomorrow, further inland with highs in the low 90s. In the central San Joaquin Valley, mostly sunny with highs of 102, partly cloudy in Los Angeles with highs in the low 90s. That's it for an early edition of the Evening News. We'll be back at a regular time at 6 o'clock tomorrow night. Stay tuned now for the Democratic National Convention.
Listening to 94.1 KPFA and 89.3 KPFB in Berkeley, 88.1 KSAF in Fresno, and 97.5 K248BR in Santa Cruz. Online around the world, kpfa.org.